My stepmother thought of herself as perfect, sweet, caring, and deserving of every bit of Dad's money and gifts. She played her part flawlessly until I discovered that behind this mask lay something far dirtier and nastier. Do you think she got off easy? Well, I made sure her fairy tale came crashing down. But let's start from the beginning. My name is Ben. I'm 22, and let's just say my life resembles more of a traveling circus than a movie about a happy family. The key character in this show? My stepmother Melanie, or as I call her, Miss Million Likes. Honestly, she looks to be around 40, but that doesn't stop her from acting like a spoiled girl glued to social media. I swear, it's like she lives there, feeding her ego with new photos and compliments about how she's a style icon and driven personality. Honestly, she's more of an icon, of reckless spending. Not long after my mother's death, Dad decided that one life in his home wasn't enough. He introduced us to Melanie, and ever since then, he's been practically blinded by love. He looked at her as his escape from loneliness, while she found a way to turn his bank account into her personal piggy bank. Dad spent a fortune on her, but of course, he noticed nothing. She was an expert at looking innocently into his eyes, while running her schemes behind his back. At first, her purchases seemed innocent. A dress here, a pair of shoes there, like it was no big deal. I figured it was just her style and that Dad was happy. But then I started noticing strange coincidences. For instance, every morning, she suddenly received a package, as if she'd ordered, say, an entire collection of luxury items, for no particular reason. But the real trouble began when I noticed that expensive things started disappearing from the house, and Melanie herself started sneaking out at night. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I sat in my room, fuming over her shameless behavior, and then it clicked. All right, if she's hiding something, that means one thing. I need to find out what it is. It wasn't even about the money, although yeah, she was spending it non-stop. It was about the principle. The idea of exposing her plans began growing in my mind like a snowball. She thought I was asleep, but no. I peeked out of my room and saw her slipping to the door, grabbing her purse, and glancing around as if she were some spy on her first mission. Honestly, she looked like an amateur actor trying to play a secret agent. I heard the door click shut, and I thought, all right, Melanie, I'm no actor, but tonight, I'll be your shadow. That night could easily be part of some suspense thriller. As Melanie crept toward the exit, I had this feeling that something thrilling was ahead, though I had no idea just how much. She looked like a character from a cheap crime show, glancing around and practically tiptoeing, as if afraid of getting caught red-handed. Hey, it was just me and Dad in the house. Anyway, as soon as she stepped out the door, I threw on a jacket and followed her. I caught the first taxi I saw, politely asking the driver to follow the lady's car without questions. Meanwhile, Melanie drove confidently, as if she owned the world. When the taxi stopped near a fancy restaurant, I'll admit, I paused for a second, wondering what on earth my sweet stepmother was up to. All right, maybe she just wanted a midnight snack. But no, that wasn't it. After lingering by the entrance for a moment, she went inside with the air of a queen about to own the night. All right, I thought to myself, let's see what happens next. But what came next threw me for a loop. A couple of minutes later, a young guy walked up to her, around 25 at most. He looked like he'd stepped right off the cover of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled hair, dazzling smile, the whole package. I was stunned in real life. Seriously, Melanie? And as if that wasn't enough, she pulled something shiny out of her purse and handed it to him. Guess what? My father's watch. The very one he'd bought with his savings, proudly worn, and once told me had been his long-held dream. That moment hit me like a flash. I pulled out my phone and, trying to stay unnoticed, snapped a photo. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, yet I felt this strange, triumphant satisfaction. Finally, I'd caught her red-handed. I'm pretty sure I looked half crazed to any passerby who might have glanced my way. I didn't stick around after that. I headed back home, leaving that bizarre pair to enjoy their evening. On the way back, all I could think was, I nailed it. If Dad sees these pictures, their happy family will go up in flames. Mixed feelings swirled in my head: anger, satisfaction, and a strange sense of victory as I mentally mapped out my plan. After that unforgettable night, I knew waiting around wasn't my style. I became something of an amateur private detective, and honestly, I took to the role of spy pretty well. I might have been naive, hoping Melanie would tire of her happy triangle, but I decided instead to expose her. I downloaded a call recording app, thank you modern technology, and waiting for Melanie to leave her phone unattended, I installed it on her device. Let's just say, accessing her phone was like walking through an open door. From that point on, I was James Bond. On a budget, sure. I tracked her every move, who called, who she met, where she disappeared to. And you know, Melanie didn't even try to hide. It was as if she thought no one would ever suspect her. But I was far from no one. I didn't just listen to her calls. I took pictures of her rendezvous. Just for the fun of it, like a collector. Knowledge isn't just power. It's a time bomb, and I plan to set it off. One day, scrolling through recordings, I heard a conversation that made my blood boil. She was talking with her friend about how soon the old man, her name for my father, would buy a new car. She had so much confidence in her voice, like she was planning another trip at Dad's expense, chatting about how she and this guy would go to the mountains, as if it was her legal right. I could picture my father later proudly telling the neighbors that he'd bought this car for the family, while Melanie was already mentally booking the best hotel across the country. Every time I heard her conversations or read her messages, I had no doubt. She'd planned this all out ages ago. Her so-called virtues toward Dad were pure performance, a one-woman show with her as the star and Dad and me as the clueless audience. I knew that a single photo wasn't enough. I didn't just need evidence. I needed something powerful enough that no one would ever want to be involved with her again. Dad's birthday was approaching, and honestly, I knew this would be more than just a family celebration. It was bound to be the grand finale of one tangled drama. It felt like a scene from those films where dark secrets are revealed amid thunderous applause. I had everything ready to give Dad a special surprise, and this time, it wasn't any cute gift or a card with generic wishes. The whole family gathered, as usual. Cheerful chatter, birthday wishes for Dad, while I quietly stood on the sidelines, holding my phone with the most damning information on display. My hands were almost shaking with excitement, though it felt more like anticipation. The final shot was so close. Melanie, of course, shone like the star of the evening, flaunting a new dress that surely cost Dad a small fortune. She was gliding around the room, playfully adjusting glasses here, fixing napkins there, her face constantly wearing that mask of loyalty and devotion. Now and then, she'd catch his eye, nodding toward everyone gathered with this look, as if the whole evening was solely about them. It seemed like the only thing missing were lines about eternal love and care. And naturally, in the middle of the evening, she stood up and raised a toast, spreading a sweet smile across her face. As everyone started to relax, enjoying the night's light-hearted mood, I knew this was my perfect moment. My heart was racing like I was about to jump out of a plane. I stood up and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. "Dad," I began, trying to contain a smile that was hard to hold back. "I've got something special for you. Let's take a look at your true gem." The room instantly fell silent. Melanie froze but kept up the act of looking relaxed. I played the video on my phone and began showing it to everyone. It was like slow motion, knowing exactly what was about to happen, but unable to look away. The screen showed it all: her dates, her meetings with that young guy, and of course, the watch Dad had given her, the one she'd handed over to her boyfriend. At first there was a heavy silence, as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Then came hushed whispers. Some tried to hide their shock, and others looked like they were on the verge of laughing out loud. Melanie stood there, pale as if she might faint. Dad stared at her as though he was seeing her for the first time, the real her, a complete stranger. And then she snapped. Melanie threw her glass to the floor, shattering it to pieces, and waving her arms, screamed, "You'll pay for this!" She stormed out of the room. After I pulled off this grand reveal, Melanie practically disappeared. For a few days, she simply vanished, leaving only the nervous rustling of speculation. Dad, as expected, was in shock. He wandered around the house like a ghost, locked himself in his room, and all you could hear from the outside were muffled footsteps and sighs. He looked as if life had drained every last bit of strength from him. And I didn't feel even a hint of sympathy for her. Smug satisfaction? Oh yes, that was precisely the word for my mood. I was ready to award myself a medal for unmasking her. But of course, Melanie wasn't the type to just bow out. No, that wasn't her style. She managed to leave Dad a message. She needed time to think. Funny how she acted like she still had control over the situation, even after she'd been caught red-handed. Whatever. We both knew this reflection was just a front for her plan B. Then, just a few days later, Dad received a message from the bank. He glanced at the screen, and I knew immediately something was wrong. His face changed in an instant, as if everything around him had turned black and white. It turned out Melanie had made her final move. She'd transferred a large sum of his money to her account. Oh yes, she was going out in style, like a queen, making sure Dad was left without a wife and without funds. Dad looked at the bank statement, and I saw a wild despair flash in his eyes. He even clutched at his chest like in those movies where the hero realizes everything is lost. The thought crossed my mind. Well, what are you going to do now, Queen of Drama? Without a second thought, Dad called his lawyer. At that moment, I knew there was no way back for Melanie. Less than a week had passed since she vanished, leaving Dad and me in this tragic melodrama she'd scripted herself, when suddenly she appeared on the doorstep. The scene could have been straight out of the strangest comedy. She stood at the door in a modest dress, makeup-free, like a sheep returning home, weary and lost. But there was a predatory spark in her eyes, one you couldn't miss. Clearly, someone had returned for one last act in this drama. I stood nearby, watching her as she tiptoed into the house and quietly, yet confidently said, "I need to talk." From the very first words out of her mouth, it felt like I'd seen this movie 1,000 times. She widened her eyes, telling Dad some fairy tale about how it was just a one-time thing. Yeah, right, passing expensive watches to her lover and accidentally withdrawing a hefty sum from Dad's bank account. That it was all just a mistake caused by exhaustion. An angel in the flesh who'd merely strayed off course because of work stress. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of her words. She claimed to have atoned for her wrongs and was willing to do anything to bring back our happy family. The whole scene was so fake, I half expected someone to yell, "Cut!" But then came the real shock. Dad, who had been gloomy and silent all week, suddenly nodded and said, "Let's go inside and talk." He was giving her a chance. For a moment, I thought I'd misjudged the person I'd known my whole life. This wasn't the father who would let himself be deceived, especially not after what I showed him at his birthday. But no, he let her in. I stood there, barely containing my anger. Dad looked at her like she might actually have something to explain, like this was all just some minor misstep. I was boiling inside, but on the outside, I was fuming in silence. At that moment, I realized this wasn't over. Melanie hadn't come back for nothing. She had a plan she hadn't played out yet. It was clear she was putting on her act perfectly. Her glances, her tones, every detail was carefully crafted, like a seasoned actress with perhaps a few more tricks up her sleeve. Now it was my turn to make a move. While Dad was agonizing, trying to decide if he could forgive this lost sheep, I understood. Enough waiting. If he couldn't see who she truly was, I'd help him figure it out. I had an entire collection of photos and messages on my phone. The real masterpieces of Melanie's double life. She'd been so committed to her illusion of being the perfect wife that I couldn't resist the idea of shattering her little theater. So, one evening, I sat down and sent this entire collection to her friends and family. Each message came with a little note. A gift from Melanie, because sharing is caring. And yes, it went viral. No sooner had I sent the last batch of screenshots than the internet buzzed to life. Her best friends, family acquaintances, distant relatives, all those she had so confidently deceived, were now basking in this sudden dose of truth. Her perfectly curated social life was falling apart before my eyes. As for her charming boyfriend, he vanished faster than I could say, "Surprise!" He disappeared, leaving her alone with her debts and all those little secrets she'd hidden from everyone. I mentally gave myself an A+ for this move. Watching her perfect life shatter into tiny pieces, I knew this was the victory I'd been waiting for. Naturally, Melanie was in shock. She tried to stop me, fell back on her old tricks, rolled her eyes, teared up, begged Dad to stop me, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that she never meant any harm. But her acting skills were useless now. Dad finally saw it all in a new light. No longer holding back, he looked her straight in the eyes and told her to leave. Her perfect image was literally crumbling to dust, leaving her with debts and a reputation that would never be repaired. A couple of months after this reality show, life with Dad finally felt normal again. It was like the before and after effect, like a storm breaking to reveal clear skies and sunshine. The house, once dark and gloomy, as if it were a waiting room for Melanie's whims, finally became our home again. We could breathe freely, and you know what? It was worth it. Yes, the financial damage from her schemes was considerable. Honestly, Dad was close to being left with nothing. But fortunately, with my evidence and the intervention of lawyers, we managed to recover at least part of the money she'd been sneakily funneling out. My plan had succeeded 100%. Every last bit of her dirty laundry was brought to light. And you know the best part? No one had any illusions left about her perfection. Our days were peaceful now. We even started bringing back things to the house that Melanie had always tried to get rid of, labeling them as ugly or too old. Ironically, those very items brought a warmth and coziness that reminded me of what a real family feels like. Dad, too, looked lighter, as if a heavy weight had lifted from his shoulders. And as for Melanie, well, her story played out exactly as she deserved. She'd longed for a beautiful life, luxury, and everlasting fame. Well, now her life is a series of debts, constant rejections, and endless disappointments. From what I've heard, her friends have all turned their backs on her, and now her only companion is her own pride, which led her to where she is now. She wanted to be a queen? Congratulations! Now she's queen of her own broken dreams. Now the house is filled with peace and quiet, and I feel like the darkness that seemed to settle here when Melanie moved in has finally disappeared.